The iron-grey sky pressed low over the valley, heavy with the promise of more snow, as Grady Thorne reined his stallion in at the edge of town. It was Christmas Eve, and the biting wind whipped through the bare branches of the cottonwoods, sharp enough to cut exposed skin. Late winter clung to the landscape, turning the muddy roads into frozen ruts and coating the rooftops in a thick layer of white. Grady's saddlebags hung heavy with supplies from the general store, flour, salt, coffee beans, and peppermint sticks, enough to last a month at his ranch. He had never meant to look through the warped slats of that leaning shack on the outskirts of town, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. Through the gap between the weather-beaten planks, the warm glow of a kerosene lamp spilled out against the blue-black dusk. Grady pulled his horse to a halt, his breath clouding white in the frigid air. Through the spaces in the wood, he saw her. My Lin knelt on the rough dirt floor, the lamplight casting soft shadows across her high cheekbones and the dark, silky hair pulled back into a fraying bun. 3 children gathered close around a table made from scavenged crates. My Lin wore a faded, high-collared tunic, traditional in cut but worn thin by the harsh Western elements. On a chipped tin plate before her lay the only feast this family would see on Christmas: potato peelings, bread heels hard as stone, and a smear of bacon grease scraped thin from a pan. She divided these scraps with a mother's precise, trembling hands. The oldest child, a girl of about 8 named Jade, watched with solemn, dark eyes that had seen too much want. A boy of 6, Chen, sat cross-legged with his hands folded politely in his lap. The youngest, little Bo, barely 4, swung his feet and smiled at the meager pile as if it were a banquet of roasted goose and plum pudding. My Lin portioned out the peelings into 3 small piles. She broke the hard bread into pieces, softening them with the grease, arranging them beside the scraps. "There now," she said, her voice bright and melodic, masking the tremor of exhaustion. "A fine Christmas supper for my fine children." Jade touched her mother's sleeve gently. "Mama, aren't you eating?" "I had plenty earlier while I was cooking," My Lin lied, her smile never wavering. "Sweet girl, this is all for you. Eat up before the cold gets it." Grady's throat closed like a fist. He knew hunger. He had known it as a boy before his own mother's rough hands and his grit built what became the Thorne Ranch. But he had forgotten its face until this moment. He watched the way the children accepted scraps without complaint because they trusted the woman who served them. His saddlebags hung heavy with abundance, her cupboard stood bare as bone. Grady backed his horse away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The children's voices drifted through the cold air, thanking their mother for the meal she had made from garbage. My Lin's laugh followed, warm, genuine, and defiant against the cruelty of their poverty. It was the sound of a woman refusing to let the world steal her children's joy. He rode toward his ranch as the sun set, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of violent violet and bruised orange. The land stretched wide around him, 300 acres of prime grazing, barns full of winter feed, and a house with more rooms than one man needed. He had built it all from nothing, proving every doubter wrong, succeeding beyond his boyhood dreams. But tonight, the emptiness of it struck him like a physical blow. The weight of what he had seen felt heavier than any saddle he had ever carried. Grady stared at his dinner table an hour later, unable to lift his fork. His housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, had set out a roasted chicken with potatoes and glazed carrots. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven, sat in a woven basket. Preserved peaches glistened in a china bowl. Steam rose from the dishes, filling the dining room with smells that should have made his mouth water. All he saw was My Lin dividing potato peels. "Mr. Thorne?" Mrs. Higgins stood in the doorway, concern creasing her weathered face. "Is the chicken not to your liking?" "It's fine," Grady said, pushing his plate away. "I'm just not hungry tonight." "Not on Christmas." She didn't argue, gathering the dishes with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had kept house for him for 5 years. When she left, Grady sat alone in the large room, the lamplight throwing shadows across walls that never heard children's laughter. He made his inquiries carefully the next morning, Christmas Day. The mercantile owner, Mr. Abernathy, was sorting inventory when Grady walked in. "My Lin?" Abernathy grunted, weighing a sack of grain. She keeps to herself. Husband was a laborer on the railroad, died in a rockslide near 2 years back. She stayed on. Takes in washing when she can get it, though not many folks in town want a Chinese woman touching their linens. It's a shame, really. She works hard. Family nearby? None. Just her and those 3 little ones, and Abernathy poured coffee beans into a grinder. She comes in for day-old bread sometimes. Pays with pennies. Proud woman. Won't take charity, and the town. Well, you know how this town is. They don't exactly roll out the welcome mat for her kind. At the counter, Mrs. Gable leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Too proud for her own good, and too foreign for anyone else's. The church ladies tried to bring a basket once, but they made her stand on the porch to receive it like a beggar. She thanked them, but I haven't seen her take a handout since. Grady bought supplies he didn't need and left before his questions drew more attention. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced his study while the wind rattled the windows, remembering things he had tried to forget. His mother's hands, red and cracked from scrubbing floors so he could eat. The winter they had nothing, absolutely nothing. Then, one morning, a sack of flour appeared on their porch. No note, no name. Just 50 pounds of flour that kept them alive until spring work came. He never learned who left it, but he learned what it meant. That sometimes mercy came from strangers. That goodness didn't require recognition. Cole stopped pacing and looked through the window. The stars burned cold and distant above his prosperous land. If he could help my Lynn without shaming her, without binding her with obligation or debt, he would. Before dawn on Boxing Day, Grady rose with resolution hardening like frost in his chest. He filled the largest wicker basket he owned. Eggs packed in straw, careful so none would crack. A 10-pound sack of flour. Bacon wrapped in butcher paper, thick slices from his smokehouse. Potatoes, 6 good ones without eyes or soft spots. 2 cans of milk. Dried apples. A small sack of sugar that cost more than it should, but would let those children taste sweetness. He wrapped everything in a clean cloth, tied it with twine, and left no note. The sky was still black when he saddled his horse. The stars were fading at the edges, dawn an hour away. His breath clouded white in the cold air as he rode toward town, the basket secured behind his saddle. No one stirred on the streets. The shops stood dark, windows reflecting nothing. Grady guided his horse through alleys he had never taken before, approaching my Lynn's shack from the back where fewer eyes might see. Her chimney showed no smoke yet. She would be sleeping still, conserving firewood, huddled with her children for warmth. The thought tightened something in Grady's chest. He dismounted quietly, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. The basket felt lighter than it should, though it held more food than he would eat in 3 days. He placed it on her doorstep, adjusting the cloth so the wind wouldn't disturb it. His hand shook slightly, though whether from cold or something else, he couldn't say. For a moment, he stood there imagining her opening the door to find abundance waiting. The shock on her face. Maybe tears. Gathering Jade, Chen, and Bo to show them the wonder of eggs and flour and sugar. The relief of a mother who could feed her children something more than garbage today. He retreated before light broke the horizon. Back at his ranch, Grady unsaddled his horse and stood in the barn as dawn painted the sky gold and pink. The empty stalls, the silent house, the land stretching away in all directions, he had built an empire but filled it with nothing that mattered. Maybe helping her family would fill something in him, too. He made a decision standing there in the growing light. This wouldn't be a single act of charity to soothe his conscience. Tomorrow he would bring another basket. And the next day. And the next. He would keep bringing them until she no longer needed him to, until those children grew round-cheeked and strong. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that gave shape to Grady's mornings. He woke before dawn, filled the basket while coffee brewed, and rode different routes each day so no one would track the pattern. Sometimes he approached from the north, other times from the east, cutting through the frozen creek bed where cottonwood screened the path. The basket always came back empty. She left it on her doorstep, cleaned and folded, ready for the next delivery. The wicker gleamed like she had scrubbed it. The cloth came back pressed flat, creases sharp as if she had ironed it, though he doubted she owned an iron. Small signs of gratitude began to appear. One morning, instead of just the empty basket, he found a small origami crane perched on the handle. It was folded from a scrap of brown packing paper, but the lines were precise, the neck graceful. It was a piece of art made from trash. Grady pressed it between the pages of his ledger, a fragile gift from a woman he had never properly spoken to. He varied what he brought. Essentials always: eggs, flour, bacon, milk, but other things, too. A jar of honey golden as sunlight. A tin of jasmine tea he had specially ordered from the city, thinking it might remind her of a home she hadn't seen in years. Once, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he carved a small wooden horse for the youngest child, sanded it smooth, and left it nestled among the potatoes. Sunday mornings, he saw her at church, though she always sat in the very last pew, isolated from the rest of the congregation. Mylin kept her head high, her children scrubbed and neat despite their threadbare clothes. She accepted no pity. When the hymns began, she didn't sing, but he saw her eyes close, finding peace in the music. She didn't know it was him leaving the baskets, but she was praying for her unknown benefactor. He could see it in the way her hand pressed to her heart during the silent prayer. Grady found himself arriving at church early just to watch her walk in. His housekeeper noticed the change. "You've been cheerful lately, Mr. Thorne," Mrs. Higgins said while serving breakfast one Thursday. "Whistling while you work. Haven't heard that since I don't know when." "Spring is coming," Grady said, which was true, but not the whole truth. One morning in the third week, he found a note tucked in the return basket. The paper was rough, the ink faint. "To my unknown friend, you have saved us. There are no words sufficient for such kindness. My children call you the winter spirit, but I know you are flesh and blood with a heart of gold. May the ancestors watch over you and return tenfold what you have given. Your grateful recipient." Grady stood in his barn, the early light slanting through gaps in the boards, and read the note 3 times. His throat felt tight. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket, where it rested against his heart like a talisman. That evening, he carved another toy, a small wooden bird this time. He sanded it until the grain shone, imagining small hands holding it, a child's wonder at receiving something made just for them. The baskets had started as duty, penance for the accident of his abundance beside her poverty. But somewhere between the first delivery and this morning's note, the feeling had shifted into something warmer. He thought about her more than he should. He wondered what made her laugh. He wanted to know the sound of her voice saying his name. The first real signs of spring arrived in early March. Snow melted at the edges of things, and the creek ran higher, ice breaking into chunks that tumbled downstream. Grady started including books in the baskets. He had noticed Jade staring at the hymnals in church, her eyes hungry for the words. So, he wrapped a primer in oilcloth, tucked it beneath the flower. A week later, he added a reader with simple stories, then a book of poetry. Mylin responded with art. Not just origami now, but intricate paper cutouts. A silhouette of a horse. A blooming plum branch. And drawings from the children, crude sketches of a house with smoke curling from the chimney, flowers in impossible colors, and a stick figure family holding hands. 4 of them. The mother in the center, and a tall figure in a cowboy hat standing guard. Grady kept every drawing in his desk drawer. One morning, he arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still more black than gray. He had just placed the basket when the door rattled. His heart jumped into his throat. He grabbed the basket straps, pulled back, and dove behind the water barrel just as the door opened. Mylin stepped onto the threshold in a quilted robe, barefoot despite the cold. She looked left, then right, squinting into the darkness. Grady held his breath, pressed against the rough wood of the barrel, feeling ridiculous and exposed. She stood there a long moment, searching. Then she bent and lifted the basket he had set down seconds before. He must have been louder than he thought. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the cloth. Even in the dim light, he saw her face change. He saw wonder, relief, and something like grief all mixed together. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Grady watched her cry silent tears of gratitude over eggs and flour. He watched her shoulders shake with the weight of relief. She wasn't Charity anymore. She was a woman who worked herself ragged to keep her children fed, who taught them dignity in the face of scorn. She was magnificent. Mylin carried the basket inside, closing the door softly. Grady stayed crouched until his legs cramped, making sure she wouldn't come back out. When he finally stood, the sky had lightened to grey. He rode home as the sun rose, and the fear he had been holding, that his help might shame her, that he was overstepping, burned away like morning fog. He wasn't helping out of obligation or childhood memory anymore. Somewhere between the first basket and watching her cry in the doorway, he had fallen completely in love with Mylin. The trouble started at the general store on a Tuesday morning. Grady was buying supplies, more eggs than usual, another sack of flour, dried fruit. He didn't notice Mrs. Gable watching from the fabric aisle, her eyes sharp as a hawk tracking prey. "That's a lot for one man, Mr. Thorne," she said loudly as he paid. "You entertaining company?" "Just stocking up," Grady said, keeping his voice casual. "Never know when you might need extra," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Or who you might be feeding." By Thursday, the whispers had started. Grady heard fragments of conversation that stopped when he walked past. At the feed store, 2 ranch hands went quiet. At church on Sunday, Mrs. Gable and her circle huddled together, glancing in his direction with expressions that mixed curiosity and judgment. His foreman, Red, a grizzled man who had worked for Grady since the beginning, brought it up while they were mending a fence. "Boss, I'm hearing talk in town," Red said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Thought you should know." "What kind of talk?" "Mrs. Gable's been spreading stories. Says you're buying supplies no bachelor would need. Folks are speculating you've taken up with a woman." Red paused, uncomfortable. "They think." "Well, they think you're helping that Chinese widow." Grady hammered a post straight. "And what do they think about that?" "Divided opinions. Some call it charity. Others say it ain't proper. A white rancher and a foreign woman? You know how people are. They say it's unnatural." Grady drove the post with 3 hard strikes. "Let them talk." But the talking didn't stop. It spread like fire in dry grass. By the following week, Reverend Miller approached him. "Mr. Thorne," the Reverend said, pulling him aside after the service. "I've heard rumors. If you are offering charity to Mrs. Lynn, perhaps it would be better handled through the church board. We have proper channels. A man of your standing helping a woman of her background privately? It invites scandal. Proper channels." Grady kept his voice level. "You mean committees that decide she isn't from around here, so she doesn't deserve as much? I appreciate your concern, Reverend, but I'll handle my affairs as I see fit." The gossip reached Mylin, too. That afternoon, she went to the store for thread and overheard Mrs. Gable speaking to another woman. "He's been leaving things for that Lynn woman. We all know what that means. Men like him don't give something for nothing. She's probably paying him in the only way she can." Mylin's face burned. She fled the store without her thread, shame flaming hot in her chest even though she had done nothing wrong. That night, the basket didn't come. Grady sat in his study, the filled basket beside his desk. He couldn't move. The town's judgment pressed down on him. He could stop now. He could save his reputation. But then he imagined Mylin's face finding the doorstep empty. He imagined those children going back to scraps because he was too cowardly to face gossip. He remembered the note. "You have saved us." If he stopped now, he was confirming the town's ugly whispers, that it was something shameful. Grady stood up. He grabbed the basket. But this time, he didn't wait for the cover of darkness. He waited for the sun to rise. He rode straight down Main Street as the town awoke. The basket was visible to anyone looking out their window. Let them see. Let them whisper. He was done hiding kindness. When he reached my Lynn's shack, neighbors were already stirring. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch 2 houses down, broom in hand. The blacksmith paused by his forge. Grady felt their eyes, but he didn't turn away. He dismounted, walked to my Lynn's door, and knocked loudly. Long silence. Then footsteps. The door opened slowly. My Lynn stood there, dark hair loose around her shoulders, eyes red. Jade, Chen, and Bo peered from behind her skirts. "It was you," she whispered, looking from him to the basket. "It was me," Grady said. "May I come in?" She stepped back. The shack was spotless inside. Grady sat at the crate table, the basket between them. "I heard what they are saying," my Lynn said, her voice shaking. "You shouldn't be here. It will ruin you." "I don't care what they say," Grady said. "I saw you that first night. Christmas Eve. Dividing scraps. I couldn't unsee it. I know what hunger looks like. My mother raised me on nothing but grit." Jade stepped forward. "Are you the one who brought the books?" Grady nodded. "I saw you reading the hymnals. Thought you might like stories." "I read them all," Jade said proudly. "I taught Mama the words." "Mr. Thorne," my Lynn said, tears welling again. "I cannot repay you." "I'm not asking for repayment," Grady took a deep breath. "I have a ranch. Empty rooms. Full barns. A table too big for one man. I'm asking, hoping, that you and the children might consider making it home." My Lynn froze. "As your housekeeper?" "No," Grady looked her in the eye. "As my wife. If you'll have me." You cannot mean that." The town can go to hell," Grady said softly. "I admire you, my Lynn. You feed your children joy when there is no food. You hold your head high when they look down on you. That is not something to pity. That is something to honor. And I have fallen in love with you." Before she could answer, heavy boots stomped onto the porch. The door swung open. Reverend Miller stood there, flanked by Mrs. Gable and the store owner. A small crowd had gathered behind them. "Mr. Thorne," the Reverend barked. "We need to discuss this situation immediately. This is improper." Grady stood up. He walked out onto the porch, my Lynn following him, fearful but standing tall. "Discuss what?" Grady challenged the crowd. "Your involvement with this woman," Mrs. Gable sneered. "It's a scandal. Bringing her food? And now entering her home in broad daylight. I've been bringing food to this family because they were hungry and I had plenty," Grady's voice boomed across the yard. "Because watching children eat potato peels on Christmas while I sat at a full table would have made me a coward. You want to talk about what's proper? What's proper about a whole town letting a widow and 3 children starve because she doesn't look like you?" Silence fell. Shame flickered on a few faces. "I'm not asking your permission," Grady continued. "I have asked Mrs. Lynn to marry me. To come live at the ranch. And anyone with an objection can bring it to me directly." He looked at my Lynn. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was strong. "Yes," she said, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I accept." Mrs. Gable opened her mouth to speak, but the blacksmith, a quiet man named Miller, stepped forward. "About time someone did the right thing," he grunted. He tipped his hat to my Lynn. Slowly, the crowd dispersed. The Reverend looked at Grady, then at my Lynn, and gave a stiff nod before turning away. 3 weeks later, spring had fully arrived. The snow was gone. Grady stood on his porch, watching My Lin plant a garden outside the kitchen window. She worked the soil with capable hands, planting bok choy alongside the potatoes, mixing the seeds of her homeland with the earth of her new life. The house rang with noise. Toys littered the study floor. My Lin's silk robe hung in the closet beside his duster. They had married quietly. No fuss, just promises spoken and meant. The town had shifted, not overnight, but gradually. People nodded when the Thorne family passed. The children from town came to play with Jade, Chen, and Bo, running wild across the pasture, indifferent to the prejudices of their parents. My Lin climbed the porch steps, dirt on her hands, smiling. The garden will be beautiful. You're beautiful, Grady said, catching her hand, dirt and all. Little Bo came running out, holding the wooden horse Grady had carved. Papa! Watch thunder jump. Let's see it, son, Grady smiled. That evening, they gathered for supper. Roast chicken, rice, and fresh bread. Abundance replacing scarcity. Jade said the blessing. Thank you for Papa, who found us when we were hungry. Thank you for Mama being happy again. And thank you for this good dinner. Later, under the stars, My Lin leaned against Grady's shoulder. I knew it was you, she admitted softly. Before you knocked. I prayed every night you would find the courage to step into the light. I thought I was saving you, Grady whispered, kissing her forehead. Turns out, you saved me. In the garden, seeds rested in the dark earth, waiting to grow. And on the porch, a family built not from blood, but from a basket of love and the courage to defy the world, watched the spring moon rise.